But in a country where the 85 or 80% more are Hindus, what do we really have to fear? Why are we impoverishing the whole country? We have, as I said, Judeo-Christianity in our geography. We have Islam. We have Hinduism. We are the luckiest country culturally in the world. But to try to scrub something out or try to, the kind of political language of, I don't know, कि भैंसा चुरा लेंगे या मंगलसूत्र छीन लेंगे, all this nonsense. It's embarrassing, demeaning, and it makes us less as Indians than we ought to be.
Vikram, you have dedicated your translation of the Hanuman Chalisa to Bhaskar, the 5-year-old from Suitable Boy who could basically recite the ode to Hanumanji from memory, a kind of child genius. It's not typical for an author to dedicate a book to a fictional character, is it?
No, not really, but why not?
You like Bhaskar?
I'm very fond of Bhaskar. Actually, Bhaskar, though in his when he was 5, I think we used to take part in the
school competitions or whatever.
Monkey army, the Vanar Sena in Ramlila and Brahmpur. So he loved the Hanuman Chalisa anyway. And he loved doing the Jishum that comes with all this sort of Lanka fights, etc. But later in his 50s, he fought against the sort of the uses to which the Hanuman Chalisa and all sorts of other religious texts and so on had been put. So I thought it's a nice balance. I'm going to dedicate it to Bhaskar.
Where do you think Bhaskar is right now?
है कहीं
suitable girl में आएगा कभी वापस
आ रहे हैं. Suitable girl और suitable boy के बीच में कुछ 4-5 और भी कह सकते हैं स्तंभ, कुछ खम्बे हैं, little novellas, one for each decade, and Bhaskar appears in more than one of them actually, in his 50s, and of course if you consider that he was whatever, not even in his teens then. By the time I write A Suitable Girl, which is set in the 2010 to 2014, Bhaskar would have been in his, let's see, now that would be a 60-year gap. So Bhaskar would be almost 70.
But when you dedicate this to Bhaskar, usually when you open a book, and I always look at the dedications, and because it tells you a little bit about the life of the author, who's dear to them, who's beloved to them, who's inspired them. What do we make about Vikram Seth's attachment to a person who doesn't exist? Except in his imagination and in his books.
They become real after a while. Well, for example, I dedicated the Hindi translation by Gopal Gandhi of A Suitable Boy. It was called Koi Achha Sa Ladka. I think the publishers wanted a title like Ek Suyogya Var.
Oh God,
so I said, like, is a nani or a dadi likely to ask for an Ek Suyogya Var for her poti or her dhoti? Not at all. So, Koi Achha Sa Ladka. I dedicated that translation to Mrs. Mahesh Kapoor, who is Bhaskar's grandmother.
Correct.
And Mrs. Mahesh Kapoor couldn't read A Suitable Boy because she couldn't read English. And I hoped that she might be able to get some pleasure out of Koi Achha Sa Ladka.
At what age did you, Vikram Seth, discover the Hanuman Chalisa? In some ways, it's all around us. It's Japod. We all have elders in our family.
Exactly.
You have your Usha Mami who lives below. And you've said often that she needs to recite it or hear it twice a day before she sleeps, I think.
She recites it herself twice before she goes to bed.
But at what age did you discover it?
Well, partly because it was, as you say, all around me.
Yeah.
Our family was an unusual family in that we were a kind of middle class, sort of Hindu family of a certain level of Anglicization. But my mother was more Anglicized. Her brothers went to St. Paul's, she went to Loreto, etc. My father was brought up in much more of an Indian, Punjabi, general Khatri tradition. So for him, it was much more natural to speak in Hindi or Punjabi. He learned how to write Urdu rather than Devanagari. That was his first language, and he learnt English and of course became very fluent in it. But I was lucky enough to get a little bit of both sides of it. Now, neither of them was very religious, but they were culturally sort of, my father would visit, when we'd visit our Buaji in Old Delhi, we'd do it on the correct days, not only on Rakhi, but also on Bhai Dooj, because she always thought Rakhi is this Punjabi holiday, Bhaiya Dooj ko hi manenge. So there were all these little tyohar and these little riti riwaj jo hote the na, so we would follow them. Now the Hanuman Chalisa was probably because when I get involved in a book and my characters are from a certain background, whether it's a musical background, by way of profession, whether it's a religious background, like many of my Muslim characters, like the Nawab Sahib in this book, or whether it's Bhaskar, I need to understand their world from the inside. So that's why I would get an Urdu tutor, or I'd learn a fair amount of Mir, or try to understand the Hanuman Chalisa, or the
How many languages do you speak, or know, or are able to write in?
Well, basically English and Hindi. Those are my languages. Then
I have seen your Urdu calligraphy here in your...
Yeah, I learned Urdu and properly sort of in the Thuluth script and Muhakkak, the Arabic script, because I like calligraphy, and then Chinese, of course, because I studied. I lived in China for 2 years, and I suppose a bit German. काम चला लेते हैं.
मैंने आपको इसलिए पूछा at what age do you remember discovering the Hanuman Chalisa? Because a lot of liberals grew up, I would even count myself as one of them.
So would I.
With a certain,
at least in temperament.
No, with a certain lack of cultural rootedness. Now I know it's a very big word, what is culture, but the older idea of progressive was somehow to keep religion at bay. And in the process of institutionalized religion being kept at bay, culture was also sometimes kept at bay. There's this whole debate around colonization.
I think you're right, Barkha. I think that's true. And I think, sorry to interrupt you.
No, please.
It was just that I think we had seen how the country was divided, all the bitterness that came through religion, and there may have been a bit of a reaction against that. Secondly, there was a sort of a scientific temper that grew, that is, stick to facts and logic, and faith is somehow inimical to that. Or not just faith, even the general accretions of culture. And third, you are right, we and maybe our parents, well, perhaps I should put it the other way around.
Our parents and therefore us.
Therefore we underplayed Hindu and Islamic culture as compared to the Judeo-Christian culture. Because all three of them are at play in the subcontinent.
But and I'll tell you, the reason I find it disempowering is because when you want to make a larger argument about pluralism, let's say I want to make a larger argument about pluralism, often I lack the language of faith because I didn't grow up with it. And it's very difficult to talk about, as you do in the introduction to your book, the humanity and the inclusivity of Hinduism.
Of the best of Hinduism.
Of the best of Hinduism. So we'll come to that in a moment, but let's come back to the Hanuman Chalisa. You translated it 10 years ago.
That's right.
The only public sort of rendition of it was at the Patna Literature Festival.
That's right.
10 साल बाद आप इसको publish कर रहे हैं. 10 साल क्यों नहीं publish किया आपने?
Well, several reasons. First, I'm lazy, and who's going to go through all the jhamela of publishing and interviews? Secondly, I'm still writing A Suitable Girl and its attendant novels. As if one needs more reasons, but I'll give you 2-3 more. Thirdly, I did it as a private pleasure. I love the Hanuman Chalisa, I recite it if I want to, and now how much faith there is, how much I'm doing it, that's a separate question. But the fourth thing is, how good is the translation? I mean, you can't compare it in any way to the original. So why publish it at all?
Was it tough to translate, to get the incantation, the rhythm?
It was a pleasure.
It's essentially poetry.
It's essentially poetry. It was a pleasure to do it in poetry, and being a poet, I thought it would be worth a try. The rhythms are very different from English rhythms, but I tried to do it in the rhythm of Awadhi.
Can you maybe read out a bit?
Sure.
And give us a sense of how the translation was a challenge, if it was. Did you fear that you would lose the original sort of texture of...
Of course I did. And let me put it this way, I was not afraid of failing because I wasn't going to publish it. Later I published it, and that's a different story. But say, I'll start with the dohas or something.
Yeah, please.
अच्छा, श्री गुरु चरण सरोज रज निज मनु मुकुरु सुधारी वर्ण रघुवर विमल जसु जो दायकु फलचारी बुद्धिहीन तनु जान के सुमरो पवन कुमार बल बुद्धि विद्या देहु मोहे हरु कलेश विकार. Then comes the real thing. Jai Hanuman Jnana Guna Sagar, Jai Kapisa Loko Sagar, Ramaduta Atulita Valdhama, Anjani Putra Pavana Sutram, and so on. Right the way to the final one, ki Rama Lakhan Sita Sahet, Hriday Basahu Sur Bhup. So this is a wonderful, both the dohas, which have a different rhythm, a slightly rising rhythm, and the chaupais, which have a falling rhythm, are intoxicating, mesmeric. And the imagination of him leaping across the ocean with the ring in his mouth, all these things. Yeah. Maybe we've been brought up with it at our parents' knee or our dadis' knee. Maybe we were brought up with it through Amar Chitra Katha. Yeah. Maybe through the Ramayana, Bharata, Mahabharata television, whatever it is. Somehow this thing floats back into us with the joyous rhythm of Tulsidas.
The original thought your publishers had was to publish it on Hanuman Jayanti, and you didn't want it to come out during the election campaign.
Actually, first I didn't want to publish it at all.
At all. So what persuaded you to?
Partly Usha Mami said...
Tell us about Usha Mami.
I can't. I mean, I'll embarrass her if it be...
A little bit. I mean, our audience should know who's Usha Mami.
Usha Mami lives on the ground floor. She's 90 years old. She is my beloved aunt, and this house would not be what it is, or my happiness be what it is without her. Usha Mami was the only person other than my mother to whom and that small group in the Patna Literary Festival 10 years ago, to whom I showed my translation of the Hanuman Chalisa. And actually, for her, I wrote this version. In longhand.
Oh, that's so beautiful.
So
there's pictures of this later.
Okay. What is it called? B-roll, I think. Radha calls it. So
B-roll.
This is all.
Correct.
Yeah, आपने हिंदी में भी.
ये आपकी अपने hand में.
जी हाँ, और क्या?
It's stunning. So you write longhand? You write pen to paper?
Yeah. Pen to paper on the whole. Poetry always. Pen to paper.
मैं इसको पकड़ लेती हूँ. हाँ. जी. तो आप बता रहे थे, so Usha Mami had seen it.
आपकी गोद में हनुमान.
Usha Mami had seen it, and you had no intention of publishing it.
No. And then my publisher, Speaking Tiger, got ear of it. He heard about it. He said, why don't you do it? So I said, look, I'm writing a suitable girl. Let it be. Bhaskar in A Suitable Girl is translating it. So once the whole book comes out, then I'll publish it. Haven't polished it yet. But both of them said, look, this is a bit selfish of you. You've been the beneficiary of so much translation. After all, if it weren't for Pushkin's Eugene Onegin in translation, you wouldn't become a poet or a novelist anyway. So why can't you share it with other people? So I said, all right, I'll do it. Even if it's 10% of the quality of the original, at least it'll be a window for someone.
And then you didn't want it to come out during the elections.
Well, I wanted it to come out on Hanuman Jayanti. It would be very appropriate. Chait Purnima. Then I thought, idiot, if you bring it out around the time of the election, because I'd written the introduction, I'll read a couple of paragraphs later. It'll just lead to a lot of this thing कि Vikram has become part of the Bajrang Dal या पता नहीं कुछ कह देते.
Why should you be called part of the Bajrang Dal because you...
वानर सेना का तो मैं एक तरह से I didn't want any of this spin coming on it, and besides I just thought, give me a couple of months, I'll be able to polish it.
So you thought you'd call a Bajrangi Dal person?
Whatever, or other people would read my 2 paragraphs and think that I'm extremely secular and I'm completely against them. I didn't want either to interfere with the beauty of the poem and the interest that people should have in the poem itself.
But what does Hanuman and Hanuman Chalisa mean to you?
I can't really get into that too much.
Is it literature? Is it faith? Is it belief? Is it culture? Is it a mishmash of all of it?
I think a mishmash would be right. And depending upon the time of day, the time of month, the time of year, and the time of my life, it's meant different things to me.
What does it mean to you today?
Well, it means a lot to me because of the fact that I'm returning something to its possible readers that has given me so much pleasure on a cultural level, or on a spiritual level, or whatever. I do think that, as you mentioned, the fact that many Indians don't know.
I mean, they may know it in snatches, but they've never really.
Many Hindus don't know the Hanuman Chalisa, especially if they're more westernized.
Yes.
Or they might know, Bhoot Pisach Nikat Nahi Aave. They may know one or two
That's what I mean.
lines, but why not return it to them in a poetic rendition, without too many notes of who Vibhishan was and who Sugriv was and all that. Just straightforwardly.
Now, in your introduction.
Yeah. वो गुगला सकते हैं if they want to. पता कर लो कहाँ कौन है Sugriv.
Yeah, but in your introduction, you talk about, as you've said, the best of Hinduism. That the best of Hinduism represents humanity and inclusivity.
Correct.
And that what upsets you is when that is contrasted with that the phrase you use is self-aggrandizement and willful cruelty of those who may use Hanumanji to actually be violent or discriminatory towards a fellow Indian and a fellow human being.
Absolutely.
Do you see a lot of that happening?
Yes, but let me draw back a little bit. People say, you earlier used the phrase Hinduism, etc. People say of Islam, it's a religion of peace. People say of Buddhism, it's a philosophical religion, etc. Or Christianity, Christ is known as the Prince of Peace. But if you really see what the trajectory of these religions has been, what their historical place, what their social place, what their human place has been, it's not always been peace. It's sometimes been cruelty, it's sometimes been war. So that's why I don't say Islam is a peaceful religion or Hinduism is a tolerant religion. What I say is the best of Hinduism is this. You may see the best of Islam at a certain time when the Western world was clothed in darkness and the Greek learning was kept alive through Arabic in the Dark Ages in Europe. So you look at Buddhism, which is a wonderful religion. My brother Shantam is a Buddhist teacher. But if you look at how it's worked in Sri Lanka or in Myanmar, for example, you wouldn't necessarily say the personnel who inhabit this institution, this wonderful cultural institution called Buddhism, have necessarily lived up to the best of its tenets.
I see the distinction.
Now let me go back to your question, having sort of done a macro on it. Yes, I see a lot of it. I mean, I think there's, for deliberate purposes, and not just over the last 10 years, but let's say over the last 25 years, maybe, the spin that's been put on religion has been one of creating antagonisms for electoral purposes or for power purposes in general, or if your own life is unemployed or unfulfilled, to give yourself a certain raise as sort of height compared to your fellow citizens. So for whatever reason it is, I see quite a lot of that. And people seem to be completely unashamed of saying, in the lottery of life, I've been fortunate and, not I've been fortunate, I am right and you are wrong. Actually, this may be the time for me to actually read those paragraphs.
Please.
The introduction is, as I said, a very short one, just explaining sort of something about the technicalities of how
the
translation, and the chopai and dohas and so on and so forth. But at the very beginning, I write a couple of paragraphs and then a couple at the end. So here it is. Shall I look at you or at the camera?
You can look at the camera.
The Hanuman Chalisa by Tulsidas is one of the best known and best loved poems in the world. Tens of millions of people can recite it by heart and chant it daily, as well as in times singularly joyful or sorrowful, or when they feel the need for support or courage. So too did Bhaskar, the precocious young mathematician in A Suitable Boy, who as a child loved to participate in the annual Ram Leela in Brahmpur in his role as a monkey warrior. I did this translation more than 10 years ago as a labor of love, but have only recently been persuaded to publish it. I hope that it will enable the Hanuman Chalisa to be enjoyed by those who cannot understand the Hindi or Awadhi of the 16th century. Then I'll skip to the end. At any rate, all this, the effort of translation, however imperfect, is just a means of acquainting or reacquainting people with a magical and joyful work impressed in the memories and affections of millions, which encapsulates a whole culture in fewer than 90 lines. I dedicate this translation to Bhaskar, who learned the poem before he was 5, but who spent his 50s fighting the chauvinism and intolerance to which this and many other well-beloved religious texts and rituals have been put. Nothing could be further from the humanity and inclusivity of the best of Hinduism than the self-aggrandizement and willful cruelty of those who use the religion in which, in the lottery of life, they happen to be born, in order to attack or demean others. May the Hanuman Chalisa continue to spread joy, expand imagination, and give strength and solace to its many past and future readers.
And that's beautiful, and I agree with every word. But today there is a debate on whether Hinduism and Hindutva are different. Political Hinduism, as it were. There has also been political Islam. There has been a politicization or a weaponization, as you have pointed out, in different contexts of all faiths. And today we're seeing Hinduism at the center of our politics. Or maybe I should say Hindutva. I don't know what the correct or the appropriate word would be. When you talk about the chauvinism that your character Bhaskar fought, that you think the best of Hinduism actually militates against or is the opposite of, what concerns you the most of what you are seeing today or have been seeing in terms of the misuse of religion?
Well, as I've said, cruelty and self-aggrandizement. Cruelty is intrinsically bad. It leads to, misery in people's lives. The fact that they don't feel part of the country to which they have every bit as much right as you and I have to consider themselves equal citizens. And aggrandizement has a corrupting and corrosive effect on the person who does it. It makes them, it blunts their sensibilities. It weakens their sense of logic and humanity, and it makes them less well-functioning human beings. And it also weakens the country. India has never been stronger than when it's been united, and never weaker than when citizens feel disunited.
So when you hear the word Hindutva, what does it say to you?
Well, because it's been used in a certain context of political thought. In fact, the very word you could say was, the etymology of the word comes from a certain source. Clearly, it's that kind of powerfully exclusive, excluding Hinduism. But historically, I mean, if you really look at how I wouldn't say the reception of Hanumanji, but also let's say the rise of the worship of Hanuman came probably around the 10th, 11th centuries, when just as Hinduism had thrown out Buddhism, so in the north of India, Islam was coming in, and people probably felt we need a kind of warrior and protective God. So it's not entirely new. There are historical trends and drifts. But in a country where the 85 or 80% more are Hindus, what do we really have to fear? Why are we impoverishing the whole country? We have, as I said, Judeo-Christianity in our geography. We have Islam. We have Hinduism. We're the luckiest country culturally in the world. Okay, it'd be nice if we had a little bit of the Chinese-Japanese culture, then we'd be totally fulfilled. I, in my own life, have tried to enrich my life by that. But to try to scrub something out, or try to, the kind of political language of, I don't know, कि भैंसा चुरा लेंगे या मंगलसूत्र छीन लेंगे, all this nonsense. It's embarrassing, demeaning, and it makes us less as Indians than we ought to be.
You have said that you believe that after this election result, a certain kind of normalcy or normalization or restraint on extremes. I'm summarizing, I'm paraphrasing, I'm not quoting you exactly. That there is the sort of moderating influences of, let's say, a Nitish Kumar and a Chandrababu Naidu. This is one of the comments that you have made. Soon after the government was sworn in, one of the earliest news headlines was Arundhati Roy, and the anti-terror law that I should say was a product of the Congress years. The UAPA came to us from the Congress. But after many years, and not for a book, but a speech on Kashmir, this case has been revived.
Yeah.
What did that say to you?
It's ridiculous. It's completely wrong. But I'm not entirely, I mean, I won't say whether I expected it, which I didn't, or whether I was surprised, which I don't know whether I was or wasn't. It startled me. But it may be that they were trying to change the conversation, or it may be that they're trying to show that there's life in the old wounded lion yet, or whatever they were trying to do or show. I'm not, it's early days yet.
Yeah, it's not clear whether...
One doesn't know what the direction will be.
Correct.
One can hardly see in the kind of dhundlapan of politics what the next month is going to hold, let alone the next year, let alone the next 5 years. But I do hope that they won't try to do a kind of national Maharashtra by picking off little bits of each other's parties.
And this you're saying for both sides, the opposition and the government?
Yes.
Or are you saying it only for the government?
No, I'm saying it for, actually in this case, I'm saying it for both sides. I mean, it's interesting. Because, Nitish has paltoed about 12 times now. Why not make it a baker's dozen from his point of view? So it's possible that on some subject that he really believes in, if the BJP tries to go too Kattar, he might try to detach himself. Those 12 votes, quite precious. The other 16 votes, we don't know what Chirag might do with his 5 or what might happen with the other 7 and the independent. So there's always this interplay. The BJP is not known for using Sam, but they're quite used to using Dam, Dand and Bhed. So they might do what they did. They might try to pick off someone from the other camp. My hope is it happens in either direction, and that we don't get a kind of situation as happened after 1977, when the first dictator, you might say, was thrown out. But then the various parties started squabbling among themselves in this कौन बनेगा प्रधानमंत्री दोनों तो है ना एक तरह से कौन बनेगा प्रधानमंत्री के उस चक्कर में इतना पड़ जाए कि फिर अपने आपस में वो like they fall apart, and then she sweeps into power in 1980. Let us hope that we can concentrate during these 5 years on the real problems that we have in our country.
Can I ask you, you've spoken about the best of Hinduism, and you've spoken about your deeply felt disagreements with misusing religion to inflict pain or violence on a fellow citizen. There are lessons in this verdict for the BJP and for
the electoral verdict.
The electoral verdict for the right. But are there lessons in our shifting politics for liberals on the left of the spectrum? And I'll tell you why I ask you that. In the American context, one of the egregious mistakes that Hillary Clinton possibly made was to call Trump voters a basket of deplorables. Because when you start judging somebody for a political choice in a democracy, you're actually condescending to the voter. With our context, we see this debate often as we get more polarized, that, if you support that party or that person, you are the problem. So we start judging each other, conversations break down, that old spirit of, acha chalo chodo na, samosa kha ke jao, has kind of gone. Those are the neighborhoods we grew up in, where we didn't always agree. But we were able to be convivial at the end of that disagreement. Are there lessons for those who have opposed Modi's politics?
Yeah.
Because you can't dismiss him as a political lightweight.
Oh, certainly not.
He's a smart, popular politician. And a
pragmatic one. So he may well adjust to the new realities. Your general point, I take it. Do remember, however, that the BJP didn't really lose much of its vote share.
Exactly.
So it was really, you can call it a verdict, but actually it was really more of
It was a little rap on the knuckles. It was a containment, not a rejection.
Correct. But why did it happen? It happened because these other parties realized that if they didn't, in Benjamin Franklin's phrase, hang together, they would assuredly hang separately. So that's how that, together with many other things, including in UP, the choice of candidates, many other things. It was a near-run thing. And even then, they didn't win as such, but they came, within striking distance, and certainly will form a fine opposition, I hope.
Yeah.
As long as there's not too much squabbling. The general lesson about condescending to people and to demonizing them in all polities is the case, including in this one. It's not that the Modi government has not done anything in foreign affairs, you might say, or in infrastructure, and there are various areas. They made gross errors, economic errors, like in demonetization and in the rollout of various programs and so on. And certainly, it's such an uneven playing field in economics that there seems to be a kind of crony capitalism which has not led to an increase in unemployment. Then there's the kind of complication in the agricultural sector, how the farmers and so on have been alienated. Part of the reason why they lost was because they started saying, ye Khalistani hai, or the farmers are, it was partly the condescension of the BJP that prevented them from gaining a few more.
And their hubris has been contained.
Partly, that's right. Now, I don't think that the other side should be doing it. It's not a good electoral strategy. It's not a good strategy in terms of decency or humanity. And it's not even a good strategy in terms of logic. Because you have to think, if I had been born in that kind of family or with that kind of upbringing, I might well think in those terms. The point is to wean people over to what you think is the right course of things.
And for that, you need effective persuasion, political communication, storytelling.
Exactly. And not just political, just human interaction.
I want to ask you about the courts. And I want to ask you about this because your mother, Justice Leela Seth, was a fine person, but also a fine judge who, as a woman, broke many barriers in the judiciary. Now,
we both have mothers of that sort, right, Barkha?
That is true. I am happy to say
Prabha Dutt was like a shining example, iconic example of great journalism.
Thank you for remembering her. Fali Nariman once said to me, I think it was 1 month before he died, and he said, when governments in India have been very powerful, and this was not about the BJP, he said the same thing happened in the emergency, right? He said, when governments in India have been very powerful, the judiciary has not been that powerful. That was his somewhat cynical sort of take. And yet, every Indian citizen, if you ask them, what are the two institutions that you turn to in the end? One will be, they'll say the army, they'll say we trust them, and they'll say the courts. In the end, everybody takes their conflicts, their dilemmas, their hope, their expectations to the judiciary. How do you see the role of the judiciary thus far?
Okay. Well, the army has never interfered.
Yes.
There was a book, I remember, called After Nehru Who, in which the chief of the army staff was considered as one of the possibilities. It was not realistic. India is not Pakistan.
Exactly.
The press is another
story altogether.
Estate, you could call it, to whom people maybe look towards. The television journalism, even worse than print journalism, disgraced itself. On the other hand, private individuals who set up their own companies or who set up their own web links, whether from abroad or within, have taken the role of that to some extent. And the fact that people can communicate with each other better in social media has also helped a great deal. It's affected the results of this election. Now, as regards the courts.
What would your mother have felt about it today? I'm sure you had those conversations right until the end.
It is complicated. One sometimes one has to look at individual judgments. Insofar as it doesn't, when I take a little time out to think about this, see, we would have been in a worse position, I think, if the courts had not to some extent, begun to choose their own personnel. I think I said earlier that any institution, whether a religion or courts or whatever, depends upon the personnel who inhabit it. And if it had continued to be the government, by now we would have had a completely dabbu judiciary. There's no question about it. If they had chosen...
If the government had a say in appointing judges?
They do have a say, but they do not have complete say. Even now, they can say, we don't like this judge for this reason or that reason, or they can just sit on an appointment, and they do.
Saurabh Kirpal is a case in point.
It's a graceful example. But there are other examples as well. Certainly not the only one. Also, within the collegium itself, it's not a perfect system by any means. In fact, there are personal antagonisms, personal possible favoritism, personal lack of knowledge about things. However, it is meant that the government has not had complete sway in selecting its judges. However, the question arises, what will you do after you're 65 in the Supreme Court, or after you're 62 in a High Court? And all sorts of little temptations here and there. Judges are also human beings, play their part. There have been certain decisions, and I won't specify them, which have been courageous. There are certain decisions, well, why not specify one? For example, about the electoral bonds issue.
Yeah.
There have been certain decisions which seem to be very odd, like the Babri Masjid decision.
The Ayodhya verdict itself.
Ayodhya verdict, and also how it began by saying it was completely illegal what they did. However, what can we do? We better endorse it. On the other hand, I would say the same judge, Chandrachud, who wrote that decision, in another case said that the decision of his father in ADM Jabalpur, in the habeas corpus case, was wrong, which itself took a lot of courage. Yeah. So let us just say it's been a mixed bag. But I don't think Wali Nariman was being too cynical when he said what he said. I do think judges sort of swim in the water of our politics and our consciousness, let's say, social consciousness, and to some extent get affected by it, I'd say out of pressure rather than out of, I wouldn't say cowardice, but there is pressure. And the pusillanimity that my mother inveighed against in certain judgments. No one is excluded from that in our polity. Neither journalists, no bureaucrats, no business people, no judges, no, for that matter, writers and artists who sometimes self-censor themselves.
Do you?
I'm in a comparatively lucky position, in that I don't have a family, I don't have to be concerned. I mean, in the sense that I don't have to say, my needs are comparatively simple. Yeah. So I can't give myself,
too many pats on the back.
Indeed not. And, but yes, I don't also shout from the rooftops unless I find something singularly unjust or singularly worth talking about. Whether it's the Babri Masjid thing, or whether it's the 377, or whether it's Hanuman, there's certain things on which I've spoken out. Now, in this particular case, I would not have talked too much about the change of governments, except that I found that all the interviews that I've perforce been made by my publishers to do have come about around the time of the elections, and I haven't tried to avoid questions. That's the reason.
And also, it's a kind of inevitable dialogue that is ongoing in our society, so you can't
I'm a citizen. I have every right to speak my mind.
But you mentioned 377, and I'm glad you did, because one of the judgments from the Supreme Court was the decision to not legalize same-sex marriage. Now, for context to some younger members of our audience, many years ago...
You even know what 377 is. You better sort of explain
So I'm going to just explain that. Many years ago, when being gay was a crime in this country, and I was a young journalist, I don't know if you remember this, but you came out as gay or partially gay on one of my programs, We the People. And that was a time when we were all canvassing for the decriminalization of homosexuality, which was what 377 at that time stipulated.
Right.
A number of years later, so much has changed for the better.
Yeah.
But when that last mile fight happened to legalize same-sex marriage, and the courts declined to do so, what did you feel about that?
It wasn't entirely unexpected.
Yes.
I obviously felt deeply disappointed. It was a 3-2 verdict.
Yes.
And somehow I thought, somehow one of the judges, very decent man, Ravindra Bhatt, I thought that he would probably
rule the
on the other side. But out of his own sense of principle, he ruled the way he did. And the Chief Justice and, was it Kaul, I think? No, which other?
Chandrachud was on it.
Chandrachud
I've forgotten all the judges.
Anyway, there were two, Krishna, or maybe, anyway.
Sanjay Kaul. But I don't think he was on the judge. No, he bench, was he? Suddenly can't remember.
He's Kashmiri judge. No, I wish I could remember.
Justice Sanjay Kaul is one.
Well, he was on
he was on the
bench, yes. Let's say, the right side, but the wrong side in terms of how it turned out.
Yeah.
But I think it's difficult to, I hope that people will be able to get the rights that married couples are allowed. And the government did agree to have a committee which would discuss rights of inheritance, rights of visitation in case of sickness, rights of pensions, all this sort of stuff. So let's see. It may be incremental, but I hope certainly that in the fullness of time, as these 60-year-olds move into retirement and other people become 60-year-olds, when the case comes up, perhaps before a larger bench, then it will be decided in the correct way.
What is your hope or expectation from the Prime Minister in his third term? You are a citizen, as you said.
The Prime Minister, obviously, maybe his wings have been clipped a bit, but he has a great deal of power. I noticed that they've retained all the important ministries, defense, home.
Everyone's the same, yeah.
Home. Now that, of course, is you send the police out or you send the ED out, that is both finance and home, to raid me because I'm an industrialist who owns a newspaper which has written an article which is not to your liking, or for some other reason, whatever. Apni manmani kar lete hain. And this kind of willfulness will probably be reduced somewhat, but not all that much. What I think may not happen is this, what I call trailer bazi. They said, these 10 years have just been a trailer for what is about to come. And that would have led to a real problem in our society. I think if they tried to create laws which try to further alienate 200 million people in our society, that would have led to terrible effects, I think. And that, I think, the N and the N who sit on the two sides of the
Nitish and Chandrababu.
And Naidu and Nitish, I think will prevent that from happening, just as Samta and other parties prevented that sort of thing from happening in the NDA, however much the BJP itself might have liked to do that.
I want to end by returning briefly to Hanuman.
But this is just comparative. Optimism based on a certain modicum of realism. No one can predict what's actually going to happen.
I agree. To return to Hanuman Chalisa and Hanumanji, have you also noticed how the iconography around Lord Hanuman has changed?
Who could not?
Yeah. And there's a much more sort of militant depiction on social media, at least, right? What do you make of that?
Well, it's not as if Hanumanji is an entirely gentle spirit.
Yeah.
Sukshma roop dhare se hi dikhawa, vikata roop dhare lanka jarawa. So there is this lanka jarawa aspect of Hanumanji as well.
Yeah.
It's just that they don't, and there's also the Asura Sahares. I think a great deal of stress has been put on that aspect of Hanumanji. I wish they would, in their छाती पीटना and ये क्या कहते हैं, chest thumping and aggrandizement, as I call it, also consider that there's a limit to pride, and that Hanumanji himself didn't do that. He was in the seva of other principles and of another person. And I'm not quite sure how broad his chest was.
How do I leave a conversation with you without asking about Suitable Girl? I don't know if I should share the secret of what I spotted in your home.
You can do that.
Okay, thank you.
So I was unwise enough to let you into my little gufa.
So in your gufa, we saw a copy of The Suitable Boy, and next to it a copy of The Suitable Boy, but the boy is scratched out and Suitable Girl is written. And for a moment I thought that was the secret first copy of Suitable Girl that I had spotted, and I was very excited.
You're the first person to have noticed that. Yeah.
Where is Suitable Girl?
Well, it's all around us. I mean, this line of files contains both the plots and the characters and part of the writing of it.
How many files are there in this home?
Miles and miles
there are at least
of piles of files. So there are lots and lots and lots and lots of
Can I tell you a story? I don't know if I've ever told you this. When I was a young student, I had just graduated. I have to tell you a story because you rhyme. Kissa ye hai ki main college se graduate hui और I wanted to be either a lawyer or a journalist, and unfortunately I chose to be a journalist. So उस समय सिर्फ जामिया में mass communication का सेंटर होता था, 30 लोग लेते थे from the whole.
मेरी बहन आराधना भी उसमें दाखिल हुई थी.
So entrance exam में we were given the option of critiquing a book. और हमने आपके गोल्डन गेट को वर्स में पूरा वर्स में एग्जाम दिया और उसके बेसिस पे हमें एडमिशन मिला. So you are responsible for everything that's wrong in my life.
अरे आप वकील
I became a journalist thanks to you.
बन जाती.
If I had not passed that exam, मैं lawyer होती.
अरे हो सकता कि आप बेंच पे बैठे सही जजमेंट दे सकती थी.
हाँ, see, it's all your fault. Okay, where is suitable girl?
कसूर मैं कबूल करता हूँ. अब suitable girl के बारे में है, गर्भ में है कह सकते हैं. लेकिन it's a very long gestation. And she will arrive in the fullness of time. I'm not now tied to any publisher. I've given back all my advances, etc., both abroad and here in India. And the characters are driving me on. That is part of the reason I said I was so reluctant to publish the Hanuman Chalisa now. I thought it would be like one of those things that would distract me from what I'm supposed to be doing. In fact, it's proved to be a bit of an inspiration.
I'm glad.
A little bit of an impetus.
I'm glad.
So for that, Barkha, I thank you. That aspect of noticing that the suitable girl was there was my own way of convincing myself that she actually lives somewhere, if only in my imagination and in the lives of my characters.
Can't wait to read it. Thank you.
I can't wait to read it either.
Thank you, Vikram.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.